Although we will be ideally working on clients when we lash most of the time, for learning it's important to find ways to practice even when we don't have a client in front of us. So for this, what I like to do is take a sponge of some sort. I have used some foam craft paper, which is sticky on the bottom, to just stick to my workstation for this example. And then I've taken 10 millimeters 0.12 diameter lashes, and I've made my own little set of lashes. And you're probably thinking, girl, those are wonky. Well, I intentionally made them that way. So here's what I've done. I've taken my 0.12 diameter lashes, dip in, and start making a wonky lash set, because really and truly, most clients have lots of things to correct when it comes to the natural lash direction. So that is what we are working on today. So you can even create different layers of lashes by using the side of the sponge and putting lash layers behind, or you can continue on the sponge like so. This is creating layers so that you can really get used to working with wonky lashes. So the more imperfect it is for this example, the better. It's also a good way to practice isolation. Some clients have super unruly natural lashes. So when we're working with classic lashes, which I know you're already familiar with, classic lashes, we have one individual classic lash to one individual natural lash. And we can make the natural lash look like it grows in a beautiful uniform direction by placing an extension on different angles and so on. That's awesome, and the same rule applies for volume, but for volume, we're working with multiple little tiny lashes within a fan. So we not only have one lash to worry about when we're placing, but we have a ton of tips of lashes to focus on and make sure that they're all pointing in the right direction. So I'm working with my isolation tweezers and my volume tweezers, and actually I'm not on the right angle for me to feel comfortable working, so I'm gonna take my sponge, I'm gonna turn it a little bit. That way you can see from the side too, because the side view is the best view. Okay, so let's start with the basics first. We've got our wonky natural lashes over here, as you can see. So just like classics, we may only be able to work with about 1 millimeter of the natural lash and rely on that for perfect retention. So that can be a little bit tricky with classics and with volume. With volume, we're a little bit luckier only because we do have a little bit of a bigger base for the most part, but wrapping can be really tough with direction. So don't put a lot of pressure on yourself. You're not going to wrap every single natural lash, especially if there is direction required, because it's just impossible. So I'm going ahead, I'm gonna make my fan. Now you can do this with pre-mades as well. Pre-mades actually make it a little bit easier for sure, but even if you're working with handmade, just check this out. So I like to, when I'm working with lashes that need a lot of direction, I like to make my fan. And I like, this is my little lash hack, I like to crystallize it on command like I would if I was leaving it for later and making my own pre-made fans. Obviously, you want to make sure your hands are so clean when you're doing this, but I've crystallized my fan, and that's going to make it so much easier because I'm not relying on wrapping. I'm not worrying about the lashes that are within my fan moving past the natural lash and getting all wonky. So I've crystallized it, it's good to go. Now I'm gonna give it just a tiny micro dip again at the base, only about 1 millimeter in. Now I'm ready to place like I would a classic lash, focusing on the direction. So if the natural lash tilts to the left, I'm gonna place it on the right. And if the natural lash tilts to the right, I'm gonna place it on the left. And if the natural lash flows perfectly uniform, then we are not worrying about direction and we are placing it either on the top or the bottom, right in the middle of that natural lash. So I find crystallizing my fans to make it so much easier for doing this. So you can have your fans made already, or you can make them on command like I've just done. Now, I do need to be totally honest with you, working with synthetic fibers like the lashes that I'm working on today, it is actually more challenging to connect to these fibers than it is to a natural lash, because a natural lash is in fact porous. The extension truly does act magnetic versus these plastic fibers like our lashes. It's great for practice for sure, but it is a little more tricky. I like to use less glue when I'm working on a real human, but when I am working on fake lashes, I find that you kind of need a little bit more. So if that's something that comes up, just know that it's okay only for practice, but on a real client, you're gonna wanna veer on the side of less. So we will continue practicing that as we go, but I'm gonna show you how much the fan width affects direction for our next example. So I'm gonna create a really wide fan for this one. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and crystallize. Wait for just a couple seconds. Tiny amount of adhesive, and then I'm gonna place the fan. So I have a couple more examples like this to show you after this one. Okay, there's my wide fan. Now I'm gonna show you same dimension, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm gonna place my narrow fan now. So look at the difference between both of these fans. As you can see, a wider fan naturally covers more surface area. But with that comes natural direction. So my fan, if I place this fan on the outer corner, since the fan goes and swoops out so much, I'm gonna naturally, just by default, elongate that outer corner. Versus this fan here, being much skinnier in appearance, this is not going to direct the corner of the eye out at all if it's placed there. So let's go back to our styling for a second. If we have a client whose eyes need elongation, wide stem fan, even just on the outer corner, will be awesome because it's going to swoop that way anyhow. And in a moment, I'll show you what it looks like when you place the fan on a little bit more on the side of the natural lash versus in the middle or towards the inner corner. But so if we have this type of fan, this wide fan, and we want elongation, awesome. But if we need to lift the eye up, say, and we don't want to elongate, say, the outer corner, because that's a super common thing that we have to do, especially with almond eye shapes or downturned eye shapes or anything like that. If we elongate that outer corner, it's gonna actually make our set look a little bit unintentional, we'll say. So we wanna work with more narrow fans like this one for those clients. Does that mean that we have to stick with this type of fan throughout the whole set? Absolutely not. We can definitely work with a mix of both, and you can use certain fan types in certain areas and it will all blend lovely. So there's really no rhyme or rhythm. So now I'm just gonna use my sponge. I'm gonna pull these off and show you how the placement of your fan actually placed on the natural lash makes a difference as well. when you're working with any sort of direction, you want to make sure that your placement is so perfect. I really find that looking from the side is the only way that I can get perfect placement. And I find that especially if I work with a consistent curl for many sets in a row, then I have this kind of angle just embedded into me. Like I'm stuck on autopilot kind of, and I always want to go in on the same angle. But then when I switch up my curls, I have to kind of retrain myself. So I may have to twist my hands a little more towards myself or a little more away from myself in order to suit that curl and make sure that the base of the fan does in fact make contact with that natural lash, because it is so important that the tiniest little base is perfectly flush to get good retention. So anyhow, back to the task at hand. I'm gonna place my first fan on the right side of my natural lash. So let's say this lash has no direction necessary, but I'm not focusing on where I'm placing it. I place it on the side, something like this. There you go. Okay, check this out. So I've placed my fan on the right side of the lash for this example, and the left side of the lash for this example. So by doing this, my fan automatically wants to swoop to the area that I have. So by doing this, my fan automatically wants to swoop in the direction of the side that I have placed it on. So this is something to keep in mind as well. I'm just gonna place one more, and I'm gonna place it perfectly in the middle so you can see. To show you the difference. There's so many extra factors to consider when it comes to direction for volume. So let's say if we did a fan like this, and then a fan like this, and then a fan in the middle, we would get lots of texture. Would the set look uniform? Definitely not. Would the set look intentional? It could, if you wanted texture and you were making sure that you were keeping this in mind and working back and forth on eye to eye to make sure that the eyes looked balanced. Extra texture, if that's what you're going for, this is what you're gonna wanna do. You're gonna wanna make lots of short stem fans, really wide fans, and you're gonna wanna direct them in different directions, but it has to be intentional. If you do this by accident throughout your lash set, the eyes could look unbalanced and the set could look very different than you had intended. But it's great to keep all these things in mind when we're creating our lash set. And although all of this stuff seems like a lot in the beginning, I remember feeling super overwhelmed by all of the things, but before you know it, just keep practicing, keep trying things, even if you're not sure what it's gonna look like. Before you know it, you feel so comfortable that you don't even have to think about them. You just know. So if you ever feel overwhelmed like I did, just know that that's all part of it. So check out the difference that the placement on the natural lash has made to a straight natural lash. So we really have to also think about where on that natural lash we are placing our fan and how it's going to look. So those are all my tips for direction right now, and I cannot wait to see how you put all of your learnings to the test very soon. Be sure to send us all the photos.